the multiple jurisdictions of different Orthodox groups in the United States, which can often be confusing. So he's going to just sort of give us some clarity, so it should be good. So a couple house rules, just keep eating and stuff like that. If you get up and have to do stuff, just try to be quiet and just so you're not disturbing, things like that. If you have to leave, that's fine too, but just, try to keep any conversations because it's a small room. Some people will hear it. Other than that, I think that's it. So if you have questions, people ask questions whenever they come.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've spoken here enough where I feel like
Okay, if you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt and raise your hand and ask something. Because a lot of times what happens is he talks for about 10 minutes and then we get on our question and answer stuff and it's just like discussion time for the rest, which actually is a lot more fun. So,
yes, I feel like it is.
Yeah, so you feel free to just interrupt if you have questions. All right, go ahead.
Sure. So, anyone that goes to seminary with me, they will probably tell you that if you hang out with me, even just once, I will probably talk about one of three things, if not all three. And that is liturgical rites, issues between the Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox, and jurisdictions. So at the end of this talk, I will have spoken about all three of those things at this church. So, makes sense. So, as Father said, there in America we have a variety of Orthodox churches that are represented. Did you give them the handout?
I did, yeah.
Oh, you did. Okay. So I also included Roman Catholic ones on there as well, but we had a technical issue because I have a new computer, so I'm not always sure about what is being sent out to the people. So unfortunately, those were not included on the list. But if I talk too much about those, I'll just write it on the board. We can kind of just go from there. So I'm sure a lot of you hear that the situation we have in America is uncanonical, right? Is that essentially what's been said? Yeah. Now, my thesis...
I think you have to explain what uncanonical means for people.
Okay. So my thesis that I'm doing right now, it's like one of the only things that I'm still in seminary for, is on this issue. So it's huge. It's big. Now, uncanonical would mean that it goes against like the canons or like the ruling of the church. So what the canons are essentially rules that were laid out by local and ecumenical councils that basically keep things in good order. So the word canon kind of comes from the word that means measuring stick. So like this is kind of like the ideal.
So like an example would be like for me, like I can't just go to say like another jurisdiction and just and just serve necessarily. Usually I often have to get like a letter of permission and stuff like that when you're crossing this much territory. And for bishops even more strict. The bishop is gonna he can't just go into someone else's church. He can't even do it for another diocese in the OCA. Like he couldn't just go over to Pennsylvania and go and visit the church. Like he has to get permission from that other bishop to do that. Yeah, he can't just show up. Because historically, that was a source of all kinds of problems and bishops messing in other bishops' dioceses. And so this rule is shown to keep good order and to prevent, chaos and other stupid stuff happening. So and there's canons, ancient canons about this. That's an example of, complying with that.
So Father Matthew just hit on a point that I was going to make later, but I'll make it now. They're actually, according to the canonical tradition of the church, a hierarch is not allowed to preach in another diocese other than his own. Like, the strictest ruling of it says that cannot occur. So, according to the interpretations of the canons, which is kind of like another set of things, there's a book called the Rudder, which was put together by Saint Nicodemus of Mount Athos, and he was very big on lay people should read the canons. They should kind of have a sense of what is going on so that clergy can't abuse it, essentially. So he has all these notes on it, and that's a lot of us that do canon law, whether we do it in seminary or whether we just talk about it, like we based a lot of it on his commentary, because he scanned like all the canons from church history and just compiled it all. So he says that, of course, a bishop can, if he has the blessing of the other bishop, but just generally speaking, he can't go into the diocese and just give a homily or serve or do anything. And so that's kind of one of the main points I make about the situation that we have in America. It does not meet the ideal, because historically it's very obvious that you would have one bishop for a diocese and that's it. And then a bishop would have his diocese, and you wouldn't interfere, you wouldn't build the church in another hierarch's diocese. But because of how things went down here in America, no one really officially claimed it. I mean, Russia sort of did, but that wasn't fully recognized by everybody. And so now, I mean, we've had this mode of existence here for a few centuries, and I don't think there was much push to harmonize up until recently. So effectively, each of the bishops gave a blessing to the others to still build their parishes and have their communities and do their own thing.
Yeah.
And that's that does not fit a lot of the narratives that we're told now. But that's essentially the way it's gone down here. However, it's not unique to America. We have this in Australia, we have this in Western Europe, we have this, well, I guess America would include North and South America, because we have it down there too. For the Eastern Orthodox, we've pretty much resisted it in the homelands. There are some situations. There's a diocese for the Romanian church in Serbia, and there's a diocese for the Serbian church in Romania. That's largely due to the borders of the countries have shifted, so it got kind of confusing who was under what diocese and where they could build a church. So they sort of just deal with that. There's like a conflict occasionally, but for the most part, they kind of just allow it.
So, talk about an example where it's a clear violation, which would be like Constantinople putting a bishop in Qatar, because that's a pretty.
I thought you were going to say Ukraine, but
well, we'll avoid that for now. I mean, that's a whole other thing. But Qatar is kind of pretty. That's pretty clear cut.
That was going to be my next example, and I'm a member of the Antiochian Archdiocese, so I have to be very careful because I'm being recorded, and this is going to be on YouTube.
Okay.
So, but yeah, there's one parish in Qatar for the Eastern Orthodox Church, and it currently is being run by the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. Historically, the region we know as Qatar was within the territory of the Patriarchate of Antioch, but Antioch has no churches there, and so it's kind of
Qatar is
comfortable.
one of the Persian Gulf states, like United Arab Emirates, all over in there. So it's one of those countries.
Yeah, and it's kind of come to a standstill. I mean, I haven't heard anything new about what is going on there. There was some back and forth between the patriarchates, some years out, like 3 years ago maybe, or 2 years ago even. And then Constantinople was asked to intervene, and they haven't done much about it. I think the Patriarchate of Alexandria, or rather, the Patriarch of Alexandria volunteered to also kind of mediate, and that was just sort of ignored. So the Qatar thing has kind of come to a standstill. But certainly if like the Russians or Constantinople or the Serbian church or the Polish church wanted to start a parish in Qatar, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. It would need to be under whoever the local bishop is there. But whether that's Jerusalem or Antioch, that's kind of up for debate now. And yeah, then I mean.
Well, another one it's also a non-canonical issue, but it's also a matter of diplomacy,
Right.
international diplomacy. Because the Roman Catholic Church actually established a diocese in Moscow.
Yeah.
And then they ended up, so if there was a real canonical orthodoxy there, the complaint was you're proselytizing the Orthodox faithful to come to the Roman Church. And that's been actually brought up.
Yeah.
So there's a clear, I think a very blatant example of where you have the Patriarchate in Moscow plus a Roman Catholic Archbishop in Moscow.
Well, the Roman Catholic Church has had overlap in most of the homelands since about the 12th century.
Yeah.
So part of their current canonical norm is to have that. I mean,
Yeah, but it's not that they established the diocese. Not
Yeah, they have-
But they have that in other places too.
okay, if you go to, let's take Antioch, for example. Who claims the throne of Antioch within the Roman communion? There's the Maronite Church, there's the Syrian Uniates, there's the Melkite Church, there was a Latin Patriarchate of Antioch. I think it's currently not enthroned, but it still exists on the books. So in theory, you could have 4
Yeah.
patriarchs in union with the Church of Rome that are claiming the same city.
Alexandria too.
Right, well, yeah, I mean, they have that, and they have all kinds of, I mean, they essentially, anytime there's enough of a particular group somewhere, they can, you know, have what they call like an apostolic vicariate that then turns into its own diocese. So in terms of the canon law of the Roman Church, they've sort of resolved this because they've had to deal with it for so long that they're just like, it's not the ideal, because if you read their code of canon law, it does say that the norm is 1 bishop per diocese, but then there's like a subset underneath that says, however, if a need arises for a particular church to maintain a parallel hierarchy, they may do so with the pontifical blessing, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So if any of your Roman Catholic friends give you a hard time about all our jurisdictions, you say, well, you've got them too. So
Isn't that called catch-22?
sure, yeah. That's good. You know, and then you have other issues too. Like I know, all right, you know, let's just get really juicy here. So up in Boston, the OCA and the Greeks cannot concelebrate because Metropolitan Methodius of Boston got mad at Nikon for claiming the throne of Boston. He suggested he simply just change the name of the diocese, just claim a different city. And he said, well, actually the Albanians were here first, and I'm a successor to that. And your cathedral isn't actually in Boston, it's in Brookline. And yeah, and so because of that, in interaction, they cannot concelebrate, because Methodius does not want them to. So, and the thing is, and he didn't mind, he didn't mind that like the parishes themselves would be under other dioceses but next to each other. For him, it was just about claiming the same city. But yet, you know, San Francisco, we have at least 4 jurisdictions that claim that, if not more.
For New York City,
Yeah, or forget it.
there's like 10 or
Forget it.
12.
And a lot of them don't even live in New York. So, yeah, and there's a lot of, I think, selectively applying the canons when we see fit. And so, I mean, the situation that we have here for us in the Eastern Orthodox Church, like I said, it's not unique to America, it's more of a diasporal thing. But for the Roman Catholics and for the Oriental Orthodox too, it is a homeland thing. The first instance of overlap was in the Holy Land. The Armenians set up their own diocese in Jerusalem in the 7th century. Even though they were in communion with the Syriac Church there, who already had a bishop, but they had enough of them there that they said, we, you know, want to start our own diocese. And to this day, Jerusalem has 4 hierarchs of the Oriental Orthodox that are there. The Armenian Church is now a patriarch there. The Syriacs have a patriarchal vicar. The Copts have a metropolitan, and the Ethiopians have an archbishop. And they're all in union with each other. Now, they all do a different liturgical rite, so that I feel like that sort of plays a factor in setting up your own thing, because you want a bishop that speaks your language, that knows your people, and that knows your actual liturgy. For us in the Eastern Orthodox Church, you know, we all basically do the same rite. And the handful of churches that do like the Western rite, they're under the same local bishop, so they're not even like really a separate jurisdiction in of themselves. So it does kind of seem like we have a little bit less of an excuse to have all this
so
overlap.
I mean, another thing is like the language. It's like, well, yeah, there are people speaking different languages, but how many people, say like the Greeks, how many people in a typical Greek church can't speak English? No, almost none of them.
But the numbers, but the number's higher if you say how many won't speak English.
Yeah. So, but the point is that like it's not like in some circumstances where you need someone to do it in this other language because these people don't speak the same language. But here in America, like of all the Orthodox here, like 95 plus 90%, 99% of people who are Orthodox here, even if they're immigrants, can speak and understand English at least as a second language. You know, I mean, so there's not many. I mean, there are some. I mean, if they're real recent, but so that also makes it harder to justify, right? Like if you were in a situation where you had like, wow, there's this whole group of people and they don't speak our same language, you can understand maybe having their own bishop or something like that.
Sure.
But it's like English is sort of like the universal language. Like people all over the world are able to speak it. So
Well, that and so, for example, within the Bulgarian church here in America, that is under the Patriarchate of Bulgaria, they have a good number of parishes of converts that follow the Russian style of service, like to the T, like even more than some of the Russian ones do. And they don't
so
follow.
it makes them Bulgarian, right?
Right, exactly. Just canonically, they're part of the Bulgarian church. They're even on the old calendar in these churches, and the Bulgarian church is on the new calendar. So the ethnic Bulgarian churches here are on the new calendar, and they follow their normative style of service, which is just more of a variation of the general Greek style. But when you have situations where it's like you don't even match what's going on in your mother church, then it does kind of make you wonder, like, what's motivating people to do certain things or to be under a certain bishop. I mean, there was a Rokor church that just switched to being under the Serbian church, like in Florida, and they still do everything the same way they did, as far as I know. Still says Russian on the sign, but they're just
Okay, so that brings up a good point. So what is the problem, the practical problem of multiple jurisdictions? Okay, so it's not in canonical norm of rules that have typically been followed throughout history.
Yeah.
But what's the practical problem on the ground with having all these overlapping jurisdictions?
Well, there's confusion with some people about who they're actually in communion with. Not everybody carries a list of all the canonical local bishops with them in their head like I do. You know. There's also just when you get to be, especially if you're like a deacon or a priest, I mean, as you both can probably speak from experience, you can't just go over to Three Saints, which is like, what, like 5-10 minutes from here?
Yeah.
That's under the Moscow Patriarchate. You need a blessing from their bishop and from your bishop. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Both
it
bishops
creates
need
like
the blessing.
bureaucratic, it is a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare. It slows the whole system down when you want to do anything.
Yeah,
Generally speaking, I mean,
Mhm.
like it just makes it more complicated.
absolutely. And it gives off the vibe, both to Orthodox and to non-Orthodox, that we're not one church in terms of like our ecclesiology. I mean, sure, we're united at the chalice, and we can celebrate, you know, our services together, but administratively, there's still a very sharp distinction where we technically have nothing to do with each other because we're not required to. We're either connected to the mother church back home, whether that's in Syria or that's, you know, in Romania or like wherever it is, or there's something that's localized, like in the OCA. The OCA is not obedient to a mother church. It's just here. So, yeah, I mean that creates all kinds of practical
So
issues.
another thing I was thinking about is if you got a problem with your bishop or your church, you can go shopping. See, this is part of the problem too. Is you can just go shopping.
Oh yes,
Right.
thank
So
you.
whether
Yeah.
you're a lay person or say you're a priest and you keep getting in trouble and you can't get your act together, and you can like instead of like dealing with the problems because you keep. Let's say your bishop sends you to a couple different churches and you keep getting kicked out of these churches and you insist that it's always the people's fault, and the bishop's finally like, you know, you need to, you know, you're the fault, and there's like, no, I'm out of here, I'm going to go find another bishop. Well, then
Right.
let's leave and go find another bishop sometimes.
That's also not canonical either.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to leave your diocese.
Yeah.
You know, without the blessing of a bishop, of course. Many of these people, they get excommunicated, sometimes they get laicized, they get brought out of their diocese or whatever, and they just switch a jurisdiction, and the other jurisdiction takes them.
Yeah.
That is a
Some-
problem.
and some
That's the
jurisdictions
biggest
are-
problem, I think.
Are you
Some
talking about
jurisdictions are one of
priests
them.
or parishioners or both?
Priests. Well, it could apply to parishioners too. If your priest tells you not to take communion because you're not repenting of some sin that you just,
Yeah.
insist on continuing, you're not supposed to take communion, period. But some people go, I just won't commune here. I'll go to that church. They don't know me. And that's part of why some of the dioceses here,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, no,
some
no.
jurisdictions here apply very strict. Did you have communion, did you have confession last night or within the week? And a lot of times it's to safeguard against people who will hop around to avoid accountability, to make sure that,
Yeah, so and there's other things too, like take weddings, or baptisms or examples, like say, you get this, someone who never comes to our church, be like, hey, I gotta get married, and the church stuff's like an afterthought, they've already planned everything else. And then like something I will often do is I insist that everyone, well, I've never married anybody, maybe this is why. I insist that people have to get premarital counseling for at least like maybe 30 days or a couple months or something. They have to go to premarital counseling of some kind. And they can do it with me or they can go somewhere else. But I'm not gonna just marry people if there's like serious problems. There's a little bit of due diligence you should do, just a little bit, And so I just make that, but like someone's like, I don't like that, then just go find another priest somewhere else, right? Or say like godparents, like with baptisms, like some priests are really strict, or some dioceses or jurisdictions might be like, no, both godparents must be Orthodox, and if it's a boy, baby, they must both be, you must have,
One has to be male.
or they both have to be male. Yeah, all this different stuff. So people will go shopping around for that, and so the problem with that is like maybe sometimes the priest or the church is being overly strict, or maybe it's not really justified. But the problem is it creates a culture of just sort of like do whatever the hell you want, right? Which overall is just problematic. So I would say, so this is a whole bunch of ways in which this causes issues.
Now, some of what you spoke of, and especially at a lay level, that can happen between parishes that are within the same diocese.
Yes.
But normally it is cross-jurisdictional because, of course, you're probably in touch with the other local OCA priests more than any of the other ones, I would assume. And so if you have like a parishioner that is, resisting, the discipline that you're giving them, you'll let them know. I know my priest at the church that I was received at in Tennessee, he tells all the local clergy, regardless of their jurisdiction, who he has told not to receive, so that if they speak over, yeah, like they know, and they're, from what I understand, they're pretty good about keeping in touch over there about like, who's in bad standing essentially, or who's in, so that they know.
Like this is something Bishop Bible talks about, but like this is what like a good priest should do. Is if say if someone comes to my parish and I find out they're like from another nearby parish or something, and you talk and you find out and if they're really mad about something and they left there, we're gonna tell you, right? Usually because they're people love to sort of bad talk, like bad ex-boyfriends and stuff, right? So when you find that out, usually like I've had this happen maybe once, but this is the pause. You say, oh, that's okay. You need to go back home. You need to go back to your church and work things out. I mean, unless there's something really egregious and like, wow, this is like kind of abusive, or this person is really, if there's something going on, like, maybe like there's some weirdo in church who keeps like sort of like making advances on somebody and they just trying to get away. There's other things, but if it's like this person just isn't learning how to get along, you should go back and work things out. Because one, like as a church, we don't want people like that here. Right? You know what I mean? You don't want people who are all like coming here because they're pissed off at somebody else.
Yeah.
Like that's not good, right? And that person needs to go back and hopefully encourage them to try to like, you need to work this out and not run from all your conflict. But not everyone does that. Some people just sort of like take everybody in, because they want more numbers, or they're just, I don't know, not careful.
Yeah. You've had your hand up a while. But.
Where does the OCA fall? Which patriarch is the OCA under?
It's not a patriarchy.
Patriarchy.
So the OCA is what it was granted autocephaly by the Patriarchate of Moscow in 1970. Yeah. But it's not fully signed off by all the patriarchates, namely Constantinople. So the OCA's canonicity is not in question. It's it's a church that's in communion with the other 14 autocephalous Eastern Orthodox churches, but its status as an autocephalous church and then potentially a patriarchate is what they all don't agree on, which is part of the issue, because if they were all to acknowledge its autocephaly, they would have to admit that they're in the OCA's turf. But here's what's interesting. In the Tomos of Autocephaly, Moscow says they will remain in America with 45 institutions, and they list them all. And to this day, that's still what they hold to. I've been told that some of those parishes have shut down, so if the Moscow Patriarchate wants to open another church, they have to use the name of one of the list of the 45 of them.
Yes.
That's the geography.
So I just had,
That I don't know about, I'm not sure.
we have like a clergy, get-togethers every so often in this area.
Mhm.
So like, I was talking with like the dean from the patriarchal churches, and they're saying now like, they had a couple churches that closed, and then they're trying to reopen new churches.
Yep.
And it's really not, it's not the same place, or the same name, or the same community. And the dean was like, to the bishop, are we supposed to do this? Well, not really. I mean, so like, they're
Yep.
explicitly violating the Tomos that they
Yes.
issued.
Right. And they're
And there's stuff in the Tomos too, that those churches are, the plan is they're eventually supposed to
Depart.
depart
well,
and pass over.
what it says is that the OCA is to work with other local jurisdictions at eventually harmonizing into one local
Yeah.
American church. But it doesn't condemn the other ones for being there.
Yeah, yeah.
And like I said, the mother church is still there within the Tomos. And that's why, I've heard some people in the OCA kind of gripe, like, well, why is Road Corps still a thing? Now that Road Corps is back into Moscow, they should have just been like,
Absorbed.
yeah, into Moscow. But that would actually violate the Tomos.
Yeah, yeah.
Plus, Road Corps was huge, and they have an international synod, so it actually made more sense to stay an autonomous part of the Moscow Patriarchate. But still, if they had done that, if they had absorbed them back into just the normal Russian hierarchy, that would actually violate the OCA's Tomos. So,
I get it's weird because there's a number of parishes that grew as a result of, in terms of Road Corps, because of 1970 and after. So I would say at that time, the 1970 Peter and Paul Parish in Jersey City,
yeah,
about half of them left and went to other places. And that's basically the resurrection of the Kazanskoy Church in Newark.
Okay.
And some of their clergy
I've been there.
came from
Yeah.
Peter and Paul.
Oh, yeah.
As a family.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The George Driscowski, the entire family left and ended up in.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
What did you say when the OCA was formed, the church in Moscow agreed to 45, something about 45 churches?
Yeah, I think it's 45. I might be off by like
So
one or
what's
two.
that
But
mean, that the church in, the Moscow church is allowed to have 45 churches here?
Yeah.
Or the OCA is allowed to have 45?
the Moscow Patriarchate is allowed to have 45
Churches
in America.
What's funny about those churches is that
Church?
45, yeah.
In all of
That's
America,
it,
so
yeah.
that's less than one.
Yeah, so that's the USA, that's Canada, I think it's Mexico.
Mexico.
Right, it's wherever the territory of the OCA is considered. So yeah, I think it's those three countries. So like North America, basically.
So that's less than one, well, definitely less than one in like per state in the United States.
Yeah, there are some states that have no patriarchal Russian churches, and there are some that have like more than one. Like in Philadelphia, there's two down the street from each other.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Well,
know.
you know what's funny about the Russian patriarchal churches is the vast majority, the exception of maybe like the cathedral in Manhattan and the one out, they have one in San Francisco too, right?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Also
Tho-
called Saint.
Those are very Russian. Almost every other patriarchal church they do more English than we do.
Yeah.
All right,
That is true. I can say
they're
for
less. They're, like so many of them are. I mean, with the exception of a few of them, right? I guess Garfield would be more has some more Russian stuff, but like
Yeah.
they're like you go to them like, oh, this is an OCA church. You know, it feels exactly the same. They do the same music. They serve the same way. I mean, they're not ethnic churches in
According to
that
one of my
sense.
friends, half of Three Saints is really Ukrainian, ethnic Ukrainian. In fact, one friend is an immigrant from Ukraine. the entire family's in Three Saints. I said, where did you go to church? And then he said, Garfield. I said, oh, and no, they were going to another one. And they came up with Three Saints. I said, how are you a Ukrainian in a Moscow patriarchal church? I didn't get it.
Well, which church were they part of when they were in the Ukraine, if I may ask?
What? Oh, they were patriarchal.
Right.
Yeah.
So that makes sense why then they
He just wanted a patriarch.
Right.
Oh, wait, so they were under
Ukraine.
Kievan Patriarchate.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
he hadn't been.
Right. That, okay.
So in New
They
Jersey,
just wanted to.
so in New Jersey, you have the Garfield Church, you have St. Peter and Paul, is that it?
Yes.
There's Passaic, there's Sanak, there's Elizabeth,
So they're all in
there's a lot of them
Moscow,
around here.
right?
Yeah.
So you have,
We
like,
were.
okay, well,
And a lot of their clergy, they all went to the same seminaries, all OCA seminaries. I mean, they're very
Most of their clergy.
Yeah, I think
tied in, so.
some Mospat people I think go to Jordanville, but that's more of a Rocore thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, a lot of them are just educated at the two OCA schools that we have here.
And then they go to,
Yeah.
educate.
No, the OCA and Moscow. Although we have had Rocore people go
Yeah.
to Vlad's and to Tikhon's too. Yeah, it's not
And
unheard
St.
of.
Peter.
Yeah, yeah. But it's not just the, I guess, Russian world that has this issue. I mean, if you want to take the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, as you see, it has multiple jurisdictions here. Some of which used to be under others, like the Jerusalem Patriarchate, the Church of Greece. The Greek Archdiocese was under the Church of Greece originally, because the Church of Greece is an Orthodox church. Well, Cyprus is its own thing too.
Yeah, I know, but
Yeah.
here they're under the other.
Yeah. So, and then there's ecumenical patriarchate in institutions too. I studied that at one out in Berkeley. It's not part of the Greek Archdiocese. It is under the patriarchate. They have a bishop that oversees it there. There's a monastery in Queens that has a bunch of other churches attached to it. That's also just under the EP. There's
It's the old calendar?
they were old calendarists, but then when they became part of the patriarchate, they actually switched to the new, even though they were allowed, I think, to keep the old. And then, go ahead.
That's a question, like, these other different ethnic kind of dioceses that are under the Patriarch Constantinople,
Yeah.
talk briefly how that organization is different than our ethnic diocese.
Yes, I was gonna get to
Just
that.
compare and
Yeah.
contrasting those is probably helpful.
So pretty much, so the Ukrainian and the Carpatho-Russian jurisdictions that are under Constantinople were both pulled from people that had been under the Church of Rome. So there was a large wave of what we would call Ruthenians that wanted to become Orthodox, and then they were formed as the Carpatho-Russian Orthodox Diocese. So they were allowed to keep their own local bishop too. So in some ways, it's not as it's not a completely different setup than they had under Rome. The only difference is that they're more allowed to keep their own local things instead of having things forced on them.
Yeah.
But administratively, it's a very similar kind of situation. And same thing with the Ukrainians. They started from Ukrainian uniates that wanted to become Orthodox. Then they had a big expanse a couple of decades ago when churches from the Ukrainian Autocephalous Church were brought in. And so, these particular jurisdictions were formed out of that. So, and I think when the Ukrainian church here had its big expanse, obviously, as you all probably know, there's issues with the two schismatic churches in the Ukraine and the Moscow Patriarchate. So since Constantinople was pulling these from the diasporal communities, right, so outside of Ukraine, but were attached to these schismatic ones, Russia was involved in some of these discussions and said, as long as you no longer keep ties to the schismatic churches, we're fine if you're under Constantinople. And that's what they agreed upon. But it looks like that was not the case. So, anyway. And then the Albanian diocese under the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Albanian Archdiocese of the OCA both came out of the jurisdiction that was under the Church of Albania. Archbishop Theophon Noli, who was pretty much a genius if you think about it. He was a priest in the Russian Metropolia here, which later became the OCA. He went back to Albania and somehow secured their autocephaly. And then like a few years later came over here and was made a bishop and then started the Albanian diocese here. And that seemed to be his plan like the whole time. But then eventually after him, because of communism in Albania, they didn't want to be attached to the mother church, and there was a disagreement whether they should go under Constantinople or they should join the Metropolia, and so some went one way and some went another, and they both were allowed to basically be an ethnarchate or an ethnic diocese that is just under their respective jurisdictions. I will say that the current hierarch of the Albanian Diocese of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, he actually has served in the Church of Albania itself. He's gone there and done things, but he only has like 2 or 3 parishes here. Whereas the Albanian Archdiocese, from my experience, a lot of them aren't very Albanian anymore, and there's only like, 12, 14, but some
You
of
mean the ones in the OCA?
yes, the ones in the OCA.
Yeah, there's maybe like a dozen, maybe 20, and
Yeah.
they're almost all in New England.
Yeah. But, I mean, both with the Ecumenical Patriarchate and with the OCA, that is overlap within itself. So, like, we're in the Diocese of New York and New Jersey right now, right? Because we're in an OCA church. So, if I go over to, like, let's say the town of Brewster, which is closer to the border of Connecticut, okay, if someone wants to start an OCA church there, it's going to be in this diocese, right? The Diocese of New England, which is what's in Connecticut, is not going to, scoot over and start a parish there. But if for some reason the Albanian Archdiocese wanted to, they would be under the same hierarch as the New England Diocese, because it's Archbishop Nikon either way.
Yeah.
And so, like in theory, you could have 4 OCA churches on the same street, all with the same metropolitan, but a different local bishop if they're each part of these ethnic dioceses. Same thing with the Ecumenical Patriarchate. You could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 on the same road.
So I think one of the interesting differences between, say, the Constantinople, all the ones that are Constantinople versus like our ethnic diocese, is that all the bishops of our ethnic diocese are part of the same synod. They actually sit on the same synod and meet regularly and part of all the.
They do
Not all
too.
metropolitan.
Do they do as well?
At least 1 or 2 of the Ukrainian ones are on the synod. The Carpatho-Russian metropolitan now is on the synod.
Are they? Okay, I didn't think they were.
I don't know about the Albanian. The Palestinian Vicariate does not have a bishop right now. And there's the Exarchate for the Russian tradition in Western Europe. That's like Europe's version of the OCA, essentially. Because the OCA at one point did ask to be brought under the Patriarchate of Constantinople, but they were refused. They said, you got to handle this with Moscow. Then Moscow granted them autocephaly, and Constantinople was like, oh, that's not what we had in mind, but it was too late. So, but in Western Europe, they brought them in, and they have what they call an exarchate. I think it's actually a diocese now, but either way.
Now, the OCA, before, when we were the Metropolia, we had churches in Japan
Yeah.
and Australia
In China.
and China too.
Or
right?
China too, that I didn't know.
You guys from South America as well?
Remember Archbishop John, the 2 of them, were out of San Francisco, ended up in the Orient. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we gave most of those back up when we got out of South.
The ones in Australia are now part of the Serbian church, but that was done only a couple years ago under Metropolitan Jonah, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
I thought it was earlier than that. I thought
No, it was recent. It was recent.
Yeah. But those in Australia were former Road Corps people that somehow got in touch with the OCA.
So what's the difference between ROCOR and just the patriarchal church in Moscow?
Like administratively?
No, why is there a ROCOR?
Oh.
That's fine.
I'm trying to like.
What, the long version
Wait,
or
no,
like
no,
the
no,
short
just
version?
say why, like why
You
is
can
that?
do it. You can give like the 2-minute Reader's Digest version.
2 minute
I believe
digest
that.
version.
Yeah.
Communism took over Russia. Not cool. Rokor hierarchs,
No,
Russian
no.
hierarchs were sent away because they didn't want to die. They formed a synod called the Russian Orthodox Church Abroad. That's what it was called first. They started it with the blessing of Constantinople in Constantinople. That's another fun fact a lot of people aren't aware of. Then they were invited to live in what was then called Yugoslavia by the Serbian Patriarch. So even when Rokor wasn't getting along so well with everyone else, the Serbs always like vouched for him. And the OCA are the churches that remained loyal to Moscow until they were granted autocephaly. Whereas Rokor, in a sense, jumped ship, not necessarily in a bad way, but just like, we want nothing to do administratively.
And Rokor wasn't in communion with Moscow.
No.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I guess you could say that.
But we kind of were. I don't know how you measure that practically, because one going over, they're having communion with each other really.
Right, like you can't, it's weird, even though it happens all the time, to say you're not in communion with one church, but you're in communion with this church, but they're in
And
communion
they're
with each other.
communion with each other.
Right, so if nothing else, I mean, Rokor was always in communion with the Serbian church, so, I mean, effectively, they were still in communion with everybody. And I know they had a relationship with the Patriarchate of Antioch for a while, because Metropolitan Anthony Shear, who was 2 metropolitans ago, he was consecrated by a Rokor bishop in addition to one from Lebanon. So, and if Rokor was a completely schismatic church, we shouldn't venerate St. John of San Francisco because he was from that era too. So, but he actually.
So they were kind of schismatic for a while.
They were.
Until what year was that?
I mean, 2007 is when they completely reconciled in Moscow.
Yeah, so they kind of got brought into full communion and full kind of like right canonical relationship with.
Yeah, but still, I mean, if you talk to someone from Rokor, that's not going to be their perspective of how it went down. They're not going to ever say that they were a schismatic church. And I wasn't Orthodox during all that time, so I can't really say from experience, but like from what I gather, like I said, like my stance is if you're in communion with like one or a few churches, you are effectively in union with all if they're all in union. Otherwise, it's weird and awkward. But
You have 3 different lines of bills.
right, because right now the claim is that Antioch and Jerusalem aren't in communion with each other.
Yeah.
But all that really means is Antioch took Jerusalem off its list of the primates that it reads off when the patriarch does liturgy. Because I know for a fact since then concelebrations have actually happened, even though they
Yeah.
But it's a case by case basis.
Yeah.
So
Now, the other difference between Rokor and the Moscow Patriarchate is there are some cultural differences between the two. You know? I mean, sometimes, so you'll see that when they get together and do stuff.
it depends where you go.
Yeah.
Because some of the most zealous Rokor people are converts.
Yeah, more strict, I guess, would be one way to put it, And this is the thing, too, is, I mean, this is true with all Rokor churches, but look, anytime you're a church and the more isolated you get, like, and the more disconnected, you have a tendency to, like, pick up weirdness here and there, it just happens. Anytime, it's like if you're an old lady and you live by yourself and never see anybody,
Oh, yeah.
you start to, so like, that happens a little bit, and I feel like there's been a lot of improvements for them, It's just not good to be alone and isolated, it's not good.
Do you know how many Rokor churches there are?
In America or in the world?
In America?
I mean, they constantly plant like little missions. I don't know how like viable they all are, so I don't know that I can give an estimate. I mean, there's definitely over 100 for sure, easily,
Yeah.
easily over 100.
Rokor, the total population of people is rather big.
Yeah.
Well, depends. I mean, like, that's something you can speak to. I don't know how much you can speak to this, but like, out of all these jurisdictions here in Nigeria, how many are there? Do you know off the top of your head?
Out of all these here,
Yeah. How many are there on that list?
are we just? So I can tell you who's not represented here. The Patriarchate of Alexandria, although they once were,
Yeah.
but they no longer are. I guess like Jerusalem, they transferred it to the Palestinian Vicariate, right? Same thing with the Church of Greece, they transferred. Cyprus was never represented here. Czech lands in Slovakia was never, so like there's 5 that are not officially here.
There's 25 different groups listed here, but really 3 groups make up like 80 to 90% of the population.
Oh, wow.
And that's the Greeks, the Antiochians, and the OCA. Make up well over 3/4 of the Orthodox population. And then the next two biggest groups are Rokor and Serbs. But they're quite a bit smaller than the rest of them, but still. But so like you put those like five together, and that's over 90%. Because all these other groups, they're very small, or sometimes they don't have many people.
I feel like the Church of Romania. Maybe I'm like confusing it with the Episcopate, because I know the Episcopate is the largest diocese in the OCA, yeah? Or is it not?
It is.
Okay.
In terms of numbers of total adherents,
Yeah.
But so here's the thing, like so, there's like maybe 2,500 parishes in the U.S., something like that. But between like the OCA and the Greeks each have about 700, 750 parishes, and then the Antiochians have about like 400 or 500. So those three make up 2,000 out of the little over 2,000 parishes, in the country. So like, that's the thing, you see all these people, but really most of Orthodoxy is those three groups.
Well, yeah, I mean, a good way, if someone really wants to harmonize it here, would be to start small. Take all the smaller ones that,
Put them under other people's umbrellas, right?
Either combine them, or do something like that. But there's a lot of like resistance with that. I mean, even these vicariates or ethnic dioceses within the OCA or within the Patriarchate of Constantinople, it's an identity thing. Like they want to still be their own distinct thing, but still be Orthodox.
Yeah, and so one of the tensions with this, and I know this is the case, say, take the Assembly of Bishops meeting, right? Which is just finished happening. They didn't have enough people for a quorum show up. So it was a defunct meeting, okay? The most recent one. They didn't have 25 bishops show up. So that was in Ohio they just had. But so who funds the Assembly of Bishops? It's voluntary donations by churches. The Greeks and the OCA constitute 80 to 90% of the money that funds the Assembly of Bishops. So this is the thing, if you look at Antiochians, Greeks, and OCA, they pay for everything. More so the Greeks and Antiochians. They have a little more money. The Greeks have, but think of all the Ancient Faith Radio or any of these IOCC, FOCA. Who starts these things? Who runs them? Who funds them? Those three big jurisdictions do everything. And so what happens is these other jurisdictions don't put any money into it. They don't contribute stuff. They don't start any of these ministries themselves. Some people would criticize this, whether this is fair or not, that they're leeches. That they sort of take advantage of the situation of all the other work that the other groups do, and they can benefit from it, but they don't have to pay anything into maintaining those things. So now in the OCA where this gets really a little dicey is that the ethnic jurisdictions don't pay a fair share of tithes to the national church. So our diocese pays 38% of all of its revenues go to the central administration. The Romanians, right, who arguably have the largest diocese and more money than any other diocese in our OCA, they pay 10%. Before that, they only paid 2 or 3%. And that's been that way for decades and decades.
Well, that's the thing.
So you can see where there's some tension here, right?
Well, of
Before
course.
we'll get upset about some of this stuff and fight over it.
Yeah, because even if you're under the same metropolitan or the same patriarch, if you're a distinct group within it with your own local bishop, you are not given the same statutes as everyone else because you're having your own set of rules. So yeah, that's definitely an issue.
Yeah, so that's stuff that gets wound into this. So if you're someone like Romania or some other group like that, take any other group on here, like this, the Bulgarians or something, or the Church of Cyprus, or something, you'd be fine with maybe being a part of that synod, but you don't want them to tell you what to do, and you don't want to have to pay them money.
Yeah.
So So you can see these groups like, well, if I join the OCA, I'm gonna have to pay more money. I don't want to do that.
Well, that's how we want to.
Right? I mean, this is what happens is that
That's how we
in
want
certain jurisdictions have a bigger concern outside of themselves, right? And some of them are, because they're more ethnic, they're just like, oh, we're concerned about this particular ethnic group, and that's our focus, and that's our identity.
Yep.
So they're not concerned about IOCC or FOCA or OCF college ministries. They're just trying to do their particular thing. So, and that's partly wrapped up in it. Whereas like our identity or the Antiochians' identity is much more of like trying to convert and do missions, and it's a different conception of what we're here to do. And even the Greeks, right? They're here to be known. They're here to make a mark in the broader American culture.
Yeah.
That's what they're about, you know? So you see that reflected sort of in how they behave and what they do. So, I don't know, that's just to add a little complicated, like,
Yeah.
there's money and there's like not wanting to do your own thing. That's all wrapped up in this, you know, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, one thing that is interesting is that Constantinople sort of has a loophole here because all of their particular jurisdictions, except for the Greek Archdiocese, are all hierarchs that have a diocese that is virtually non-existent. So the Greek Archdiocese here are the only ones that have a ruling seat. So, you know, the metropolis of Atlanta, the metropolis of Chicago, like they actually live in those cities, and those are like real places with real Orthodox Christians. But all those other jurisdictions, including the ones that are just EP, they have these dioceses that there might not even be any people in some of these places anymore. So it's what they call a titular bishop. They just have a title, so that they are a bishop, but they don't have a flock. And so in some ways that kind of gets around having overlap within themselves, but effectively they still do, because then they're administering to these particular ethnic groups. In Allentown, Pennsylvania, there's the Ukrainian church under the Ecumenical Patriarchate, across the street from the Antiochian church. And in their library, it has a letter to one of their previous metropolitans, congratulating him that his see, whose name I don't remember, was elevated to a metropolis, so that he was now a metropolitan. But this diocese isn't really a thing. So they just elevated it so they could call him a metropolitan. And but then it's like, and in addition, you will continue your work for the Ukrainians in the USA. It's like, well, yeah, that is what his job is. But so there's all kinds of interesting things that people do to like maneuver and to make it work. And you know, like the Church of Poland has churches in Brazil and in Western Europe, and there's no logical reason why they wouldn't make their way up here eventually. You know, like,
The Ukrainians have RPCs.
Well, you know
Yeah.
what's funny? Like our diocese, there's our church in Williamsburg is mostly Polish Orthodox for the most part. So like we have individual churches that would possibly be a part of some of these other jurisdictions, but they're not. They're part of the OCA, integrated into the territorial diocese. We also,
Right.
you know, we have a couple like old churches on the old calendar that are all Russian speaking.
Yeah.
They're all like Muscovite peoples. We have that in Brooklyn.
there's a Georgian church in Brooklyn.
There's a
that
Georgian
is
church
now
in
the
Brooklyn,
OCA.
and we're going to be starting another Georgian mission up in Rockland County.
Oh, so
Right? So like, so that it's just funny. It shows you how complicated
Right.
some of this stuff. But it does show you that like, you can combine different like
Yeah.
ethnic groups into one territory. I mean, we're doing it right now in this
Right.
diocese. There's like at least 3 different, you know,
But there's also
different ethnicities.
But there are still Georgian churches here too. Like in Brooklyn,
Yes.
there's also a Georgian church under the Patriarchate of Georgia. Yeah, and I don't know that the OCA would ever do a Georgian eparchy or something, because there's like if they got enough Georgian churches, but because they already have three ethnic dioceses. But those had their own sort of like reason and history for existing. That's not the case now. And Georgia's not under communism anymore, so there's no reason to. So I'm curious what makes those churches want to switch.
Some of I would
Yeah.
my limited information on it is I would say some of it is that we're better funded and better organized.
Well, there you go.
So like they want to do stuff like we have a I mean, comparatively, a pretty organized, competent diocese. And a lot of times, some of these other ethnic dioceses, like, they're just, it's not, you don't know who's in charge or what's going on, and the communication's bad, and there's not a real sense of good leadership. It's just not well organized. And so, you know, like the new mission up in Rockland, we got approached by Georgians to do that. They didn't go to the Georgian Patriarchate. You know, and we bring in clergy, like we bring in clergy from Ukraine, we bring in clergy from Georgia, we bring in we bring in these other Romanian, we bring in clergy from other countries come here and you know. So
Well, yeah.
and it's because the OCA like it's more organized and reliable and like pays a little bit better than some of those other places. So I mean, it's not great, right? But like it's just better, you know. So
Well,
it's
yeah,
our church.
even in the Greek Archdiocese, I know a handful of priests that are ethnically Serbian, ethnically Romanian, ethnically Bulgarian, ethnically that are Palestinian, that all have other mother churches, but they serve in the Greek Archdiocese.
Yeah.
And the Antiochians too. I mean, it's the Patriarchate of Antioch. They have people from Jordan and Palestine, you know, I know there's at least one, maybe a few other priests that are actually from the Patriarchate of Alexandria that are like ethnic Egyptians whose families are actually not part of the Coptic Church that came here, who serve in the Antiochian Archdiocese. So it's not like some of these jurisdictions. It's like they're not incapable of having ethnic diversity. But I guess, as you said, these are some of the more major ones, because all the three I just mentioned are, like, you know, the top contenders as you described. But ROCOR too. ROCOR's got Palestinian priests. It's got Romanian priests. It's got Greek priests. I'm trying to think of other examples. I'm sure you could find. I mean, I know that the Ukrainian Church of the USA has some Romanians, but that's also probably because, you know, the whole there's like a border, you know, between the countries. They're right there. So
Yeah.
there's been some shifting of those borders too. And then of course there's a handful of converts, or actually a large handful, you know, like you and me and, you know, people that, you know, serve and in these churches. So
Yeah. And so, one of the problems with having union is that we're the only church that reports to itself, right? We talk about that. Like all the other
Yeah.
churches have to, like, there's someone else who's above them in another country
yeah,
who's giving orders.
yeah. And the OCA and ROCOR are the only ones with their own synod. All the others sit on the synod of the mother church.
Yeah.
And the Assembly of Bishops is.
They have their own board of separately under Constantinople.
Well, it's autonomy. It can't be autocephaly, otherwise they wouldn't be under Constantinople. They've asked for autocephaly in the Ukraine, and that's an issue that
Yeah.
I'm surprised didn't get
They're like
spoken of. But,
So
But-
that's part of the reason, like, if people wonder, like, why are all these jurisdictions unified, part of it is they can't all make their own decisions for themselves. There's all these other players who aren't here, who make, you know, who pull strings and have weight outside of the U.S. So
yeah,
that really complicates things, you know?
yeah. But some people want that to still be the case.
Yeah.
Others don't.
So, let me answer that. Why? Why do, like, some of the bishops isn't working out very well, right? So, like, why? Like, why are people not interested in jurisdiction union? I mean, it could save multi-millions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
It could save millions of dollars every year, okay? But it's not, right? I mean, because all the overlap and inefficiencies is really horrendous. So, that alone, right? Like, so, what's the motivation that overcomes all the benefits of being one, right? What do you, I don't hear what you.
I would, so one of the driving things in my thesis that I'm touching upon, which will hopefully answer this, is that as soon as the early church started to go from like dioceses into metropolises, into autocephalous churches and patriarchies, you start adding an identity to who you are inside the church. And I think a lot of that boils down to wanting to maintain that particular identity. I don't know why per se, because as a convert, I can't like relate to
So
that.
it's identity issues.
I think a lot of it is, and they vary. Like I was talking to this one guy that's a missionary in Albania, and we were talking about it, and he's like, well, the Church of Albania, we don't have any churches here. And I'm like, well, you did, and now they're split between the EP and the OCA. And I was like, there's a reason they still want to be like a distinct thing. And he goes, well, that's political. And I had said that it was an identity thing. And I was like, well, it's probably both. I mean, those two things aren't, like mutually exclusive.
I mean, think about our politics in the United States. How much of our politics are motivated by identity issues? Like right now, a whole lot. Right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, because there are people, like you said, that are inconveniencing themselves, not just the others, but themselves, in order to maintain an identity. And even though I just said, as a convert, I don't relate to it, there are converts who do this too. There are converts who are like super dedicated to their particular jurisdiction, whatever it may be, and then them maintaining that order. I was told by a priest of the Albanian Archdiocese of the OCA how important it was for like that setup to still be a thing. And he ended it with, I'm saying this as a non-Albanian. I'm saying this as a convert to the church who serves in the Albanian Archdiocese.
Sometimes the converts will work.
You know, what's funny is that, no, it's true though, because a lot of the really ethnic people, say ethnic Serbs or really ethnic Russians who come to church just a couple times a year, they don't care what jurisdiction the church is. And as long as that church as long as that individual church they go to is Serbian or Russian and does things in the language that they grew up with and does the practices that they're familiar with, right?
Yeah.
They don't care. Like, I mean, they don't even know half the time. We get Russians who show up at our cathedral or at South River, and next year they might show up at a different church in a different jurisdiction. They don't have any loyalty or care about that, as long as it looks like what they're used to back home.
Well, and so,
They could care less.
a large portion of OCA churches still say Russian Orthodox on their church sign, and it's on most of the cornerstones, and that you can't really ever get rid of.
Russian Orthodox Greek Catholic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I grew up in a Serbian Orthodox church.
Okay.
And we went to church every Sunday. And there are tons of people that don't go to church, but our church was pretty much full every Sunday. But what I grew up with is going to church and a lot of traditions. And I wouldn't change that for anything in the world. So the only thing that I see a little bit different with going to like an OCA church or mixed church is that you lose some of those traditions.
Sure.
No.
Well, it's funny you say that.
Yeah.
Because there are.
But I wouldn't change that for anything in the world. It helped me become the person that I am.
Right.
And I thank my parents for that and my church for that. So, but I also feel very comfortable in an OCA church too, which
Yeah.
I am thankful for. I'm really, really thankful. I'm glad that there's a good connection there.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I just want to say that.
Sure. It's funny that you mention that because I've been to 2 OCA churches that were started by Serbs. I don't think they keep the Serbian customs. I think they mostly follow standard OCA or Russian practice. But I just thought of that as soon as you said that. It's kind of funny. But I mean, in theory, I think most people would agree that, let's say we got all the jurisdictional thing like harmonized, you could still have like your church where they do things like Greek style or Russian style or
Because it's not
whatever.
so much about what's happening on an individual church level. It's about the hierarchical levels of getting all that organized into dioceses, and stuff like that. I mean, that's really where it matters because you have it now. We have dioceses that are like, that's a Polish church, that's a Russian church, that's a Georgian church. This is a OCA church. A lot of people are Carpathian or Ukrainian in the background. I mean, we have that right now, and it works out fine.
Yeah.
So like,
And I
you
will
can
say,
keep that,
I will say, the church I grew up in, there's a new priest there now, and he is making changes. There's a lot more English in the church now, which there was before, but there's even more English now. And he's ruffled some feathers, but he's on a mission. You can see he's on a mission. So they're making some changes. So branching out more.
So I think the other thing of why people have a foothold in America, particularly, more so than say other places around the world, is this. A lot of the American churches tend to be cash cows and great sources of fundraising for mother churches.
100%.
To come here because, like, say you're Armenian, okay? They're Oriental, but
Well,
you know,
Right.
they're very successful and pretty wealthy here. Armenians are. They do really well for themselves, right? Same thing with the Coptic Christians here.
Yeah.
Like
Mine
they're real,
falls.
you know, well, right, and this is also true with like the GOA. Like, why would Constantinople not want? Constantinople needs the Greek Archdiocese here
Yes.
because
Right.
that's like almost all their people and it's all their money. You know, I mean, it's huge. So like, a lot of places are like this. That they need this little foothold because it gives them an access to funds, and there's sort of a prestige about having a foothold in America as well. There's sort of a prestige thing as well that can go along with it.
Absolutely.
So there's some of those things. I don't know what degrees for different jurisdictions those play into, but
Right.
that's definitely a player.
Well, especially some of the ones that we mentioned aren't not making that much money. How much are they really supporting their mother church? Their mother church might be supporting them more than them, especially the smaller ones.
Yeah.
But certainly the larger ones where the churches, Constantinople, Antioch, where like they are living under constant, oppression, like on a daily basis, and are not allowed the
and
same
so
rights.
it's not just like we want to make more money. It's not just it's greedy. It's a survival instinct too, right? So I don't want to be too hard on that, right?
Sure.
It's like they need that in the sense of they need it. You know, they need those churches here because there's a real connection there. You know, and one thing I wonder too is, you know, religion's on the decline in a lot of areas and stuff. And sometimes if a church feels like it's struggling with being relevant or having influence, and the sense of influence is dwindling, you search to put out your tentacles of wherever you can get sort of influence in play. I mean, that's just a natural psychological response. So sometimes I wonder if that's what's going on too in certain places. Like I think of Constantinople, like it has it's like 1,000 or 2,000 people in Constantinople. Like in its actual territorial jurisdiction, it's like a couple thousand people.
It's actually more than I thought. Okay.
Yeah. So like it's tiny. So like where do they have? If they don't have it, they start to have this internal sense, and other people perceive it of a lack of legitimacy, right? And so what do you have to do in response to that? Well, you try to create a more global sort of like network of influence and power. It's what you would do, you know. So
Also, speaking of Constantinople, there's still a Rokor church in Constantinople because that was part of their original agreement when they blessed them to form the city.
Oh, really?
It's still there, and it's still under Rokor. It's not under the.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, so I mentioned that.
Wow.
So, even in some of the homelands, they make exceptions occasionally. There's Africa, the only Eastern Orthodox church that's supposed to have a presence there is the Patriarchate of Alexandria. There's ethnic Greek churches, there's ethnic Russian churches, and there's a lot of indigenous ones now too in the last 100 years, all under the Patriarchate of Alexandria. But there's 2 Rokor ones off on these little islands. But they're the only Orthodox churches on those islands, so I guess they kind of were just like, I'll let you have that.
Well, how many
But-
patriarchates of Alexandria are there?
Within
At
the
least
Eastern,
2, right?
well, if we're talking just our church, there's one. The Oriental Orthodox have the Coptic church.
Yeah, the Coptic.
But that's it, right? There's just those two.
Right.
No, do the Catholics have
But
one?
then the Catholics.
Oh, the Roman Catholics have okay, not all of them claim to be a patriarch though. They've got 3 or 4 that claim Alexandria. There's 3 also that claim Cairo. And Cairo is where the Copts are actually seated now, even though it's still
The Melkite
Alexandria in the line.
Patriarchate has the Melkite Patriarchate includes Alexandria under the
And Jerusalem, yeah. And Cilicia,
and
which is
all
Armenian.
these.
Right, well, all the East is a very ambiguous,
Yeah.
because we have it too for
That's
Antioch.
why it's very ambiguous.
Yeah. Right. Oh, well, okay, so maybe this is a good note to end on. And maybe I can do a follow-up if people want, but in terms of unifying with these groups we're not in union with, particularly the Roman Catholics and the Oriental Orthodox, we all have jurisdictions. And the other 2 have a lot of it, even in the motherlands. Well, that's going to be something that needs to be worked out too. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe we just say, we've rectified all this and we'll just keep our administrations, and that'll be a big, fun
Right.
mess. But,
Yeah. You know, the thing is too is that you don't have to when it comes to union like this, you don't have to go from 0 to 60, right, in 2 seconds.
well, no.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
steps you can take in between. For example, you can keep all the overlapping jurisdictions, but you could have everybody sit on one synod.
I think Archbishop
Right,
Michael said that was a thing that was proposed 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know has that, I guess it hasn't.
There's just not enough interest. There's too much apathy. People don't care. And I should say specifically, most lay people care to an extent that they're like, well, yeah, we want it to be one. We don't care about the jurisdiction as much as we care about usually a particular church. Or, see, most people don't, most lay people, like, as long as my traditions, right, and the identity of my church and my people are preserved, I don't care, and I think it'd be better if we were all one. That's almost everybody's position, okay?
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're only concerned about, oh, if we become one jurisdiction and then the Greeks want to make everyone Greek or something, right? I mean, that's what people are worried about. But setting that aside as like a non-starter, you know, if you put everybody on one synod, you don't have to administratively unify everything right away, but at least you're on one
No.
synod making common decisions and slowly integrating, you know, different agencies and things like that.
Yeah.
Like that wouldn't be that hard, you know?
Well, and I'm
So you
curious.
end up with two things. Who gets to be in charge, one, and two, who gets to sign the checks?
It really does come down to power and money in the end. It really does.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious also in other parts of the world where we as the Eastern Orthodox have the overlap, how much they care about it. I know in Western Europe there's been talk in general about how we're not as unified as we should be, but I don't know if there's actually a movement towards that like there seems to sort of be here
People
or
gotta
in Australia.
really want it. They gotta really want it.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of stuff to work out, right? Like say you just said, well, we're gonna be one synod, we'll let all these overlapping dioceses stand, right? You still gotta figure out how do we elect like a primate, like a metropolitan or archbishop? Like, how do we go about doing that? What's the mechanism?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a power question.
Uh-huh.
That's a power sharing question, right? And so there's things like that, like, you know,
That's like GOA.
and then how do you determine how funds funnel up to the central administration from the diocese, right? That's another money and power question. So like, those are hard questions, and so you gotta really want the unity, because you got some serious arguments, you know,
A lot of
to
stuff to
have.
give up, yeah.
Yeah, and I can also tell you, like, the Oriental Orthodox don't care about harmonizing their jurisdictions. They only really care when it comes to the ones that do the same right. So, like, the two Armenian Catholicates both have churches here. People care about, you know, uniting those two, but they still want to be, like, distinct from the Coptic and the Syriac churches, you know. So, and for people like myself that are very much in favor of unity with them, if we care about our own harmony, that's going to be an issue we'll have to deal with too at some point. And, you know, even now, the two Ethiopian synods, they just reconciled, like, over the summer. But the patriarch in exile now lives in Ethiopia with the other patriarch, and they both kind of co-rule, but they still maintain the same communities that they were already overseeing. They fuse them immediately, because otherwise it would just be like kind of a lot of chaos. So they kind of just acknowledge each other as co-patriarchs basically, but they each kind of still rule the people that were already under them.
And T is served as you.
Yeah.
All right, well, hey, let's do this.
Oh, where does Church of Finland fit in?
Finland, it's under Constantinople, but there's 6 churches there that are actually under Moscow. Yeah.
Then they give the city before me.
No, Antioch would be Patriarch of Antioch.
Syria.
So just like we have a Patriarch of Alexandria, but there's the Coptic Church, so that's the non-Chalcedonian or the Oriental Orthodox Patriarch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, yes.
Bring it on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't Catholic or Orthodox, it was just the ethnic group. Yeah.